When I got out of high school, I wanted to go into theater, and I couldn't find a job. And so I took a job working for the Baltimore Jewish Times.
Mama Cass Elliot was one of the most powerful voices of the 1960s, a woman whose voice could make everyone feel like they belonged. But behind all those breathtaking harmonies was a life marked by rejection, loneliness, and a relentless fight to be seen for more than her body. The world remembers how she died, but almost everything they believe about it is wrong. Today, we are uncovering the truth about Mama Cass and looking at how her life was far darker than anyone realized. Before Mama Cass, before the world ever knew her as Mama Cass, she was just a little girl named Ellen Naomi Cohen, growing up in Baltimore, Maryland. She was born in September of 1941 to Russian Jewish immigrant parents who had come to America searching for stability, but instead found themselves constantly struggling to stay afloat. Money was tight, stress was constant, and love, while present, often took a back seat, given everything that was happening. But even as a child, Ellen was sure of her passion. She had a voice that didn't belong to someone her age. It was the kind of voice that made adults stop what they were doing when she sang. And she loved to perform. But almost as soon as people noticed her talent, they noticed her body too. Ellen was bigger than the other kids. And in the America of the 1940s and 1950s, being a little girl who took up too much space, physically or emotionally, was treated like a flaw that needed to be fixed. That message was drilled into her way too early. When Ellen was just 8 years old, she contracted ringworm, a highly contagious skin infection. Because her mother was pregnant at the time, Ellen was sent away to live temporarily with her grandmother. Her grandmother had grown up during the Great Depression, where food was not just nourishment, it was seen as safety and comfort. So she fed Ellen constantly, because to her, it was the only way to show her love. When Ellen finally came back home, she had gained weight, and instead of concern or reassurance, what she got was medical intervention. A doctor put her on amphetamines at 8 years old. The message was clear, even if no one ever said it out loud. There is something wrong with you, and you need these pills to fix you. That moment quietly shaped the rest of her life. Her brain, still developing, was suddenly being chemically altered. Her relationship with food became tangled with guilt and fear. And worst of all, Ellen learned that her body was something to be controlled, punished, and corrected. Yet somehow, despite all of that, she still shone. At school, Ellen gravitated toward music and theater. She could sing circles around her classmates. She taught other kids how to harmonize, how to project, how to perform. In rehearsals, she was the leader. But when it came time to step on stage, she stayed in the background because her confidence had been shattered forever. She knew how people saw her and whispered about the way she looked. And she learned early that talent didn't matter in the face of all this. So she stayed off stage. Instead, she started helping others sound better, look better, shine brighter, while telling herself she didn't deserve that spotlight. By her teenage years, Ellen was caught in a painful contradiction. She had the voice of a star and the self-worth of someone who had been taught she was unlovable. That was when she decided she needed to become someone else. Cass dropped out of high school and moved to New York City. She was barely out of her teens, but she was already chasing a dream that felt like her only escape: Broadway. Sadly, it didn't go the way she hoped. She auditioned for musical roles only to be typecast as the fat girl. When she competed for a lead role in I Can Get It For You Wholesale, she lost to a rising star named Barbra Streisand. Later, she would joke bitterly that there simply weren't many parts for a 200-pound actress. But that didn't stop her. If the theater wouldn't take her, maybe music would. The folk scene in Greenwich Village was exploding. It welcomed voices that didn't fit neatly into boxes. And for the first time, Cass found a world that seemed to care more about how you sounded than how you looked. For the first time, she felt hopeful. But she was also still the little girl who had been taught that love was conditional and that success had to be earned. And that belief would follow her into every band, every relationship, and every heartbreak that came next. A rising star. Cass's voice wasn't delicate or wispy like so many of the singers who dominated the charts. It was deep, warm, and commanding. A voice that could fill a room without ever feeling harsh. When she sang, everyone and everything else fell quiet. She joined her first real group, the Big Three, alongside Tim Rose and Jim Hendrix. The trio found modest success, recording an album and touring, but they were always on the edge of something bigger. Cass, especially, seemed like she was meant for more. She had that rare quality, not just a good voice, but a voice that made people feel safe, like they could sit inside it for a while. Still, the old insecurities never left. No matter how much praise she received for her singing, she could never fully escape the way people looked at her. Even in progressive bohemian circles, beauty still meant thin. Cass felt like she was constantly being evaluated, not just for her talent, but for whether her body was allowed to be on stage. When the Big Three dissolved, Cass didn't slow down. She formed a new group called the Mugwumps, this time with two people who would change her life forever, Zal Yanovsky and Denny Doherty. Denny was charming, funny, and musically gifted. He also had a way of making Cass feel seen, really seen, in a way she had never experienced before. For a woman who had spent her life feeling invisible, that attention was intoxicating. Cass fell in love with him, deeply, but it was never returned. Denny liked her. He respected her. He admired her talent. But he didn't want her the way she wanted him. And although he never said it outright, Cass always suspected the truth. He didn't find her attractive. That realization cut deeper than anything else. Around this time, Cass made a decision that would haunt her for years. She entered into a marriage with Jim Hendrix, not out of love, but as a legal arrangement to help him avoid being drafted into the military. It was a paper marriage, empty and hollow, but it gave her a last name and a sense of stability she desperately wanted. Still, her heart was somewhere else. When the Mugwumps fell apart, Denny moved on to a new project, a group called the New Journeymen, formed with John Phillips and his wife, Michelle Phillips. Cass watched him walk away from her and into a future she wasn't part of, and she couldn't let it go. Cass followed them, literally. She showed up at rehearsals. She hung around their gigs. She lingered in their orbit, hoping that if she stayed close enough, she could somehow be pulled in, not just into the band, but into Denny's life. What she got instead was humiliation. The New Journeymen treated Cass less like a fellow musician and more like an inconvenience. They made her run errands, ordered her to get drinks, and teased her by letting her rehearse with them, but never letting her perform. It was cruel, not just because of what they did, but because they knew how much she wanted to belong. John Phillips, the band's leader, was especially harsh. Publicly, he claimed that Cass's voice didn't fit the group. Privately, the truth was uglier. He thought she was too fat. It didn't matter that her voice was one of the strongest in the room. It didn't matter that she had more experience than most of them. In his mind, she simply didn't look like someone who could be in a successful pop group. So Cass was left on the outside again, watching the man she loved build something without her. But then, everything changed. The new journeymen were living beyond their means, spending more on substances and partying than on rent. Eventually, they ran out of money. With nowhere else to go, they showed up on Cass's doorstep in Los Angeles. She didn't turn them away. Instead, she made an offer. They could stay, but she was joining the band. John Phillips didn't have a choice. It was either accept Cass or sleep on the streets. And just like that, after years of rejection, she was finally in. Later, the band would tell a different story, one about fate and a falling pipe, and a miraculous change in Cass's voice. They claimed she had been hit on the head by a piece of construction equipment, and when she woke up, she could suddenly sing in a higher register, making her perfect for the group. It was a lie. A convenient one, but for some reason, everyone believed it at the time. The real reason John Phillips hadn't wanted her had nothing to do with music, and Cass knew it. But telling the truth would have meant admitting how much she'd been hurt. So she went along with the fantasy. Soon, the new journeymen became the Mamas and the Papas, and with Cass Elliot's voice front and center, they exploded. Songs like California Dreamin' and Monday Monday made them superstars. Cass's harmonies gave their music warmth, depth, and emotional weight. Without her, the band wouldn't have sounded the same. But even as she finally stood on the world's biggest stages, the old wounds were still open. She had fame and success, but she still didn't have the one thing she wanted most: love. And that would soon tear everything apart. The birth of Mama Cass. By the time the Mamas and the Papas were dominating the charts, Cass was living the dream she had chased across the country. She was rich, famous, and finally seen as an essential part of one of the biggest bands in the world. But emotionally, she was still stuck in the same place she had been years earlier, watching Denny Doherty from across the room and hoping he might one day see her the way she saw him. Denny was her weakness. He was charming and unpredictable, the kind of man who could make you feel special just by paying attention to you. For Cass, that attention felt like oxygen. She had built her entire sense of worth around whether or not someone could love her, and Denny was the one she wanted more than anyone. But he never chose her. And that truth followed her everywhere. On tour, Cass watched as fans threw themselves at him. In recording studios, she saw how easily he drew people in. And backstage, she was forced to confront the most painful reality of all. He wanted someone else. That someone was Michelle Phillip. Michelle was everything Cass felt she wasn't. Tall, thin, blonde, effortlessly glamorous. She was also married to John Phillips, the leader of the band. But that didn't stop her and Denny from starting an affair behind his back. When Cass found out, it shattered her. She confronted Michelle in tears, but she never got an answer that ever made her feel better. Denny eventually told Cass the truth himself, that he and Michelle were together. The confession didn't just break her heart. It destroyed whatever hope she had been clinging to. Even so, she couldn't let go. Somewhere deep inside, she still believed that if she waited long enough, if she loved him hard enough, he might one day turn around and choose her. At one point, Cass even proposed to him, but he was too drunk to answer. He was too drunk to answer. That silence was louder than any rejection. So Cass did what she always did when she felt unwanted. She buried the pain. She threw herself deeper into work, into parties, into substances that numbed the ache of being unloved. The more invisible she felt emotionally, the louder she became publicly. The laughter got bigger. The persona grew brighter. But inside, she was unraveling. The band's success only made it worse. Their songs climbed the charts while their relationships fell apart. John Phillips discovered the affair between Denny and Michelle and was furious. The tension in the group became unbearable. And Cass was caught in the middle of it all, in love with one man, surrounded by another who resented her, and trapped in a band that made her feel both indispensable and disposable at the same time. To make things worse, even their music was turned against her. In the band's autobiographical song Creek Alley, John Phillips included a cruel line, "No one's getting fat except Mama Cass." It was meant as a joke, but it wasn't funny to her. Millions of people sang those words. Radio stations played them over and over. Fans laughed, and Cass was reduced once again to her body, even by the people who depended on her voice. The nickname Mama Cass stuck. She had never asked for it. And slowly, she began to realize that the version of herself the world loved was not the woman she actually was. She was becoming a caricature. The pure jolly singer with the big voice and the big laugh. The truth was far more complicated. She was lonely. She was insecure. And she was desperately tired of loving people who didn't love her back. Behind the scenes, her heartbreak was driving her into darker territory. She drank more. She used more illegal substances. The parties became wilder, and her emotional state grew more fragile by the day. In 1967, everything finally came to a head. Cass traveled to London ahead of the band for a scheduled performance, but instead of a triumphant arrival, she found herself in trouble with the authorities. She was arrested for allegedly stealing bed linens from her apartment, a bizarre and embarrassing charge that made headlines. Rumors swirled that the real reason she was detained had nothing to do with sheets. One of her lovers, a man named Pick Dawson, was suspected of dealing illegal substances, and the police believed Cass might lead them to him. She spent a night in jail. While the charges were dropped, the damage was already done. The press was brutal. The band's reputation suffered, and Cass felt more exposed than ever. Shortly after, she made a decision that stunned everyone. She left the mamas and the papas, because he finally realized how much they were hurting her. She had given them her voice, her heart, and her loyalty. In return, she got ridicule, betrayal, and a front-row seat to the man she loved choosing someone else. John Phillips had made it clear that Cass was a liability. Cass was expected to be grateful just to be there, even when she was the emotional backbone of her band. And that quiet message, repeated for years, taught her something devastating: that she had to destroy herself just to be considered worthy of staying. Her pain was ignored because she made people laugh. Her struggles were dismissed because she smiled through them. Her pain was ignored because she made people laugh. Her struggles were dismissed because she smiled through them. So she walked away. But as she stepped into a future on her own, Cass Elliot had no idea that her greatest heartbreak and her greatest humiliation were still waiting for her. The search for a new life. By the time Cassie left, she was emotionally exhausted. And this called for a reinvention. She took the name Cass Elliot, combining her childhood nickname with the name of a close friend who had died young. Cass Elliot was confident and bold. She could walk into a room and own it. She wasn't Ellen Cohen. With her new name and a burning hunger to prove herself, her solo career began with promise. Her rendition of Dream, A Little Dream of Me became a hit, proving that her voice could stand on its own. For the first time, she wasn't sharing the spotlight. It was just her, front and center. But the industry didn't know what to do with her. She was still treated like a novelty, the big girl from the famous band. Even when she tried to distance herself from the Mama Cass persona, record labels kept dragging her back into it. Album covers, marketing campaigns, and even interviews continued to frame her as the same old character. She was trapped inside an image she never chose. Still, Cass pushed forward. She took television appearances, variety specials, talk show spots, anything that would keep her visible. She smiled through the jokes. She laughed at the insults. She tried to prove that she was more than a stereotype. Then she did something extraordinary. In the late 1960s, Cass had made her home in Laurel Canyon, the heart of the Los Angeles music scene. Her house became a gathering place for legends in the making. Musicians drifted in and out at all hours. Songs were written in the living room. Harmonies were tested in the backyard. And once again, Cass was quietly pulling the strings. One day, she brought together David Crosby, Stephen Stills, and Graham Nash, three incredibly talented men who had never quite found the right place to fit. David Crosby had just left the Byrds. Stephen Stills was drifting after Buffalo Springfield. Graham Nash was unsure of his future after the Hollies. All three were incredibly talented, and all three were lost. Cass heard something in their voices that no one else had yet. She encouraged them to sing together, to see what would happen if they stopped being solo acts and became something bigger. And that led to the formation of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, one of the most influential groups in rock history. A backyard session led to something that changed the music world forever. But almost no one gave her credit for it. Just like always, Cass was the architect behind the scenes, while others stood in the spotlight. And as her legacy quietly grew, her body was starting to break down. That's when years of fat shaming, rejection, and emotional neglect had left her vulnerable. She had learned to measure her worth by how much people liked her, and how little they truly saw her. And then, just when it seemed like she might finally break free from her past, Cass made a decision that would push her body to its absolute limit. She accepted a residency in Las Vegas. It was supposed to be her big comeback, but the way things took a turn, no one could have ever seen coming. Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas is the place where legends were made, and Cassie was determined to be one of them. To prepare for the residency, she did something dangerous. She starved herself. For months, Cass followed a brutal crash diet, fasting for 4 days at a time. She lost nearly a third of her body weight in less than a year. On the outside, people congratulated her. On the inside, her body was being pushed past its limits. By the time she arrived in Las Vegas, Cass was sick beyond belief. She was suffering from acute tonsillitis, hemorrhaging vocal cords, mononucleosis, and hepatitis, all made worse by exhaustion and malnutrition. But she refused to cancel. This was her moment. She couldn't afford to fail. Her debut was supposed to be glamorous. Celebrities filled the audience. The room buzzed with anticipation. But when Cass stepped on stage, something was wrong. Her voice, the very thing that had carried her through every rejection, every humiliation, every heartbreak, barely came out. She was too weak to sing. She struggled through the first show, and when she returned for the second, it was even worse. The audience walked out, and Caesar's Palace canceled her contract within 2 days, and that was the end of that. Of course, the press decided to have a field day with it. In the aftermath of Vegas, Cass disappeared from the spotlight in a way that terrified the people around her. Friends said she barely left her house. Calls went unanswered. Her weight, which had dropped so dramatically, left her looking frail instead of glamorous. Cassie was publicly destroyed, and there was still more to come. Unfortunately, Mama Cass's tragic downfall. Behind the scenes, Cass was also hiding a secret no one knew about. She was going to become a mother. The father was Chuck Day, a guitarist who had worked with the Mamas and the Papas. Their relationship had been brief and quiet. Nothing scandalous, nothing dramatic. But when Cass realized she was pregnant, she made a choice that defined the rest of her life. She would raise the child alone. She never publicly named him, not out of shame, but out of protection. Cass had spent her entire life being watched, judged, and misunderstood. She didn't want her daughter to grow up as a headline or a rumor. She wanted her daughter Owen to belong to herself first, not the media, not the music industry, not the men who had come and gone. So when Owen was born, Cass wrapped her world around her. Motherhood became the one place where Cass didn't have to perform. Owen didn't care how Cass looked. She didn't care about hit songs or nicknames or gossip. To her, Cass was just mom. And for the first time in her life, Cass felt needed in a way that wasn't conditional. She guarded her fiercely. Nannies were dismissed if they grew too attached. Owen was kept away from the press. Cass wanted to give her daughter something she herself had never had: safety. But even that love couldn't erase the ache Cass carried. She still longed for an adult relationship that felt real. In 1971, she married Donald von Wiedenmann, a German journalist and aristocrat. To Cass, he seemed like an escape from the music world, someone who might love her without seeing her as Mama Cass. Unfortunately, the marriage lasted just 2 months. After it ended, he spoke bitterly about her, reinforcing a painful truth Cass had spent her whole life learning. People wanted proximity to her, but not intimacy. Still, she kept working, showing up on TV shows, recording albums, smiling for the cameras. Her health, however, was quietly failing. Years of starvation, pills, overwork, and emotional strain had left her body fragile. She fainted backstage at The Tonight Show in 1974, and while the doctors told her to take it slow and rest, Cass didn't want to listen. She was always pushing forward. Then came London. Her 2-week residency at the London Palladium was the greatest triumph of her solo career. Night after night, she received standing ovations. She finally felt like she had crossed the line from novelty to respected artist. She called Michelle Phillips, crying with joy. This was the life she had always wanted. After the final show, Cass went to a party at Mick Jagger's house. She laughed, celebrated, and told friends how happy she was. Friends later said Cass was in unusually high spirits. She talked about how well the shows had gone, how proud she felt, how she was finally excited about the future again. She laughed easily. She stayed late. She soaked in the attention and warmth of people who, for once, weren't looking at her with pity or mockery. Though she was coughing and struggling to breathe, she insisted she was just tired. That night, she returned to her Mayfair apartment, rented from Harry Nilsson, and went to bed. But the sad part is that she never woke up. That party was the last time people saw her alive. The next morning, her assistant and secretary arrived to go over her schedule. Cass was supposed to be preparing for more meetings and appearances. Her London run had reignited interest in her career, and plans were being made for what came next. This was her moment to shine. But Cass didn't answer her door. At first, no one panicked. She had been exhausted. Everyone assumed she was sleeping in. But as the hours passed and there was still no response, the unease grew. Cass was not the kind of person to disappear without saying something. Eventually, her secretary unlocked the bedroom door, and that's when she knew that Cass was gone. Emergency services were called immediately, but it was already too late. Cass Elliot had died in her sleep sometime during the night. The doctors later confirmed that Cass Elliot died in her sleep at 32 years old from a heart attack, the result of years of strain on a body that had been pushed too far for too long. But the world was told something else. One last cruel rumor about her. In a final cruel twist, her body was found with half-eaten food nearby. Almost immediately, a story began to circulate that Cass had choked to death while eating. Her manager invented this story to prevent any further speculation, but that turned Cass into a joke, even in the final moments of her already tragic life. A woman who had spent her life being shamed for her body was, even in death, reduced to it. It became the ultimate insult. Years later, Cassie's daughter, Owen, would uncover the truth about her mother's health, about the lie that followed her, and about her own father, Chuck Day. What she found wasn't a scandal. It was a tragedy. She interviewed friends. She read old medical records. She pieced together what Cass's final years had actually looked like. The crash dieting, the fainting spells, the untreated illnesses, the exhaustion that had been mistaken for strength. Owen is also the one who uncovered the identity of her father and decided to tell her mother's story, the version of it that no one ever bothered to find out. Mama Cass wasn't a punchline. She was a brilliant, wounded woman who finally found happiness, just long enough to lose it. Mama Cass has had one of the most devastating careers in the entertainment industry. She spent her entire life trying to prove that she was more than the way she looked. And when she finally did it, it was too late. What do you think about her story? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.